Right, well, welcome to The Raise. Today's guest is someone who's completely reimagined how freelancers and contractors handle money. It's James Fuller, who's the CEO and co-founder of Hnry, a service that's taken a pretty painful, admin-heavy part of working for yourself, like taxes, invoicing, and payments, and turned it into something that's super effortless. So Hnry, I think almost all of us are aware of Hnry in some capacity, but they've grown from a bootstrap concept to a VC-backed business. They've transformed the freelance and self-employed ecosystem across Australia and New Zealand and now the UK. And they've built a product that's so loved that people actually recommend their tax service to others, something that I'm sure most people just wanted to put their head in the sand and not think about tax at all. So James, stoked to have you here. Thanks for coming.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. That was a great intro. That's probably better than what I could have done myself. So thank you for taking that burden away from me from having to stumble through my elevator pitch.
No worries, mate. Well, let's crack into it. Starting with sort of the founding and origin. I'm really interested, James, what sparked the initial idea for Hnry?
So we always, whenever I kind of do podcasts, we always say, oh, well, it came out of personal pain. But I mean, back in the day, Claire and I were both independent contractors. We sort of fell into it really, and the for so long we just operated in this mode that I think everyone else used to at the time, which is you go and get a traditional bricks and mortar accountant, they sell you whatever flavor of software they prefer, and you just have to put up with it. It is just like, that's you have to pay $50 a month for the software, you have to pay $2,000 a year for the accountant, and you're never really sure how much money is yours. And the only thing that we could do at the time to try and regain some financial confidence was just run a couple of spreadsheets, try and work out how much money was actually going to be ours, how much was going to be for tax. And we ran like that for a couple of years. We just thought nothing of it. It just seemed like that was a sensible thing to do. Just have some, you punch in what your income is and you do some dynamic calculations and it spits out how much you should set aside for tax. We just assumed this was how everyone operated. And it was only when we had some friends come out salaried work and they were going contracting, and they both came to us individually and said, hey, you've been doing this for a couple of years. This seems like a bit of a nightmare. Like, how have you handled it? And we said, well, we've got a couple of spreadsheets. Why don't we put you on the same spreadsheets and we'll do the admin for you and we'll save you the hassle. And they said, yep, great. And even at that point, it hadn't crystallized for us that this was a business. This was just us helping out our friends and saying, well, if we can take some admin off your plate while we're doing our admin, that's just a nice thing to do. And it was only when they turned up at their contract roles, and I think they, as contractors do, everyone gets in a conversation for like, how do you do your admin and who's got good, services they use. And these friends of ours were like, oh, well, we've got, we use this system, we've got spreadsheets, and, our friends do the administration, and basically all we get in our pocket is what's ours to keep or spend or save. And suddenly they had people saying to them, like, you've got to introduce me to these folks. Like, I've got to get on this service. Like, I don't want to have to do any of this stuff. And it was really at that point, I remember sitting down and having a coffee in Wellington with what at the time was a prospective customer. But to me, it was like an intro from one of my friends who was like, hey, this guy's really struggling with his admin. Can you talk to him about your spreadsheets? And I remember coming away from that session and just a casual coffee. And I said to Claire, there's something here. This was a complete random to us who was excited at the thought of us basically offering this service. And so that was the point where we just sort of kicked off a bit of a validation process where we spun up a one-page website. We, put together a bit more of a formal spreadsheet that had an invoice template on it and some other bits. And we just set about kind of just with $100 in a Twitter ad campaign. Can we sell this service? Is it something that people would want? And using that as the validation to kind of build into the service by saying, actually, yeah, this is something that a lot of people struggle with and we can really help people here. And that was, probably early 2017 we started on that process. And, it's been obviously a long time since then, but it's that same ethos that still maintains within our business, which is actually we're just here to help people and here to make sure that people don't have to think about that admin.
Oh, I love that. It's always the best businesses are just built off a really painful problem that the founders typically experience themselves first as well. So yeah, sort of a great story to hear, and also unsurprising that you've built such a great solution, but off the back of something that obviously was a big pain point for yourself and you really understood super well. What were those early days like just getting started? What did that, what was going on for you? What sort of scope and scale did you think you could get to?
it's hard to not look back at that very early stage and say that it was fun and exciting. I think if I really think about it, it was probably quite stressful. You know, Claire and I were still, in 2017, we were both still in full-time employment. We were both still sort of, contractors ourselves. And so there was not a lot of time during the day to kind of support this emerging customer base that we had. And we would pick up customers here and there, but it would be literally, on the phone, talking to customers, onboarding them one by one, understanding their needs, and then using that to iterate what was an emerging product. I mean, still some spreadsheets behind the scenes, but it was that sort of, it never felt like it was going to be huge, not because we didn't have faith in it, but we just had that pure imposter syndrome. And I suppose we still do it a little bit now, where you start something and you just assume that, hey, this is going to be a little sideline. We've got this gig on the side that, we help people out with their tax. It's just sort of a nice thing to do. And if we're doing it for ourselves, we may as well bundle in other people's as well. And we sort of always talk about the fact that as it started to grow, your mentality around it changes from this quite casual, hey, I wonder if this is a thing, to then, maybe a year goes by and you've picked up a handful of customers and you go, okay, this seems to be a thing. I wonder if it's a thing for a tiny group of people or whether it's for more. And as you go on, you build a bit of confidence and you go, okay, this seems to be a thing for quite a few people, but like, how big a thing is it? And then it grows and it grows and grows. And then you go, oh my God, this is a big thing in New Zealand. Like, is it also a big thing in other countries? And by this time, this was sort of 2019, that we sort of got good product market validation in New Zealand. We started to think about Australia and said, like, how can we go into that market, and started to say, how much bigger could this thing be? And now we're at the point that we look at it and go, yeah, this is a big thing, but it's a big problem that exists globally. It's a problem that is not localized to New Zealand or even localized to just Australia and the UK. So it suddenly becomes, you suddenly sort of end up in a situation where you've evolved into a business that's solving a global problem in a very innovative way, and doing so in a way that no one else has done globally before. And now we've suddenly, we've emerged into this sort of era of the copycat, where people have seen us probably only really in the last couple of years, and they didn't see the early stage of really hustling to get going. And they've gone, oh, that looks like that could be easy to, build this complex system. I'll do the same thing. And now we have these sort of, in the New Zealand market, in the Australian market, we have people who are literally, they go copy and paste our website, and it's like those people who always start a business and go, I can just start my own Facebook, or I'll start Uber, but locally. And, we're now getting this strange thing that people have literally seen what we've done and they go, great, Control C, Control V, I'm in. I can make money. I can, see a successful business. We can all do that. And it's that sort of, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery thing, that actually we're now on the receiving end of people basically copying everything we do word for word, which is just crazy to think of, which is like 7-8 years ago, this thing just never existed in anyone's minds. And now suddenly it's so well known that people go, oh, I just copy it, and then I can take a slice of that pie too,
Yeah, it is definitely crazy. It's essentially something that didn't exist, and now it's something that you've built, and other people are trying to do off the back of that as well. With that in mind, and I'll get sort of to some challenges and competitor questions in a bit as well, but how do you think about building an enduring sort of competitive advantage in a secret sauce, so that, the Control C, Control V approach might work at a surface level, but actually they're just not able to unlock the same level of value that you do for your customers?
I mean, I think there's a lot that you learn after doing this for what is now 8 plus years we've been doing this. And I think that there's a lot of what you look at is like how, because you're always going to have competitors, right? You're never going to have a market to yourself, but the only thing that you can rely on is two things, which is serving your customers better than anyone else and innovating faster than your competitors. And those two things are really what we push for. So whilst the kind of Control C, Control V gang are all kind of struggling with the regulatory side of things, of how do they build legitimacy, or how can they actually work with regulators to make sure that they're aligned with stuff, we're at the other end going, all right, how do we at scale deploy features to our customers that will really surprise and delight them, and not charge them any more money for it? Being venture backed is obviously, big benefit to us, and we can go and deploy at scale with speed a whole bunch of change into our business and do that at the benefit of our customers, where, people starting out from day one, they're still in the situation of going, okay, I need to go and find out how to market this. I need to go and find out how to talk to customers. And they will probably very soon find out what we found out in the very early stages, which is just how complex this world is. And, whereas you're a bit wide-eyed at the start and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe that no one's done this before. Now we're 8 years in, you're like, I can see why no one tried to do this before, because it's not easy. And it is, if we'd have known that starting off, we probably would have been a bit more cautious about things. But I think, I do look at the sort of the copycats that are coming out, and I think they're going to have a rude awakening. First financial year end, where they're actually on the hook for filing people's taxes, and they're actually going to get people coming back to them going, you did this wrong. It does not add up. Someone else has fact checked you and it turns out you are incorrect. Or I've suddenly found out that you've pushed all of my financial information into ChatGPT, and so now all of my personal finances have become a training for a learning model. I don't like that, and I think these are all the things that when you're building an enduring business, because we've kind of done that gradually over years, we're not trying to shortcut that process by copying and just going, hey, we'll just follow the same playbook, because the bit that you can see of the playbook is the public-facing bit, and the bit that's hidden is all the hard work and effort that has come to this stage to actually build a system that is correct and that works and that actually customers really, really like. And you can't copy that. You can't copy the trust that customers give you from having used the service for years, and you can't copy, and instantly scale a business, in the same way as you can build a sustainable business over time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think as well that timing plays into it in a big way as well, right? There's one thing to be said about copying a business that has spent the last sort of 8 odd years building out a really great product, and the company that actually started with that idea and built off the back of it. And I think there is so much intrinsic knowledge and understanding of your customers that you build over time that just can't be replicated through just a simple copy paste as well. And so it can be easy, I think, for some people to naively think, it's easy to do that, when in fact it's nowhere near.
And it's inevitable, right? But I think, when you get to, if you imagine, we're currently New Zealand's largest accountancy, which is a phenomenal stat, and which is so, it's very much a pinch me moment for Claire and I, that we are in the situation that we have a larger number of customers than any other accountancy in the country. You don't get that overnight by just taking a one-size-fits-all rule to what you do or shoving everything into AI. The fact is, our team are industry experts. We now are at a size where we have support teams that are dedicated by industry. And actually, we know the inner workings of all of those industries. We've been in those industries for 8 years. We've got the experience that sits across it. That means actually, if you imagine you get a lot of kind of bricks and mortar accountancies that specialize in sort of one side of things. They might be specializing in companies or trusts or partnerships. And for them, maybe sole traders is it also ran yep, I could do a bit of sole trader tax. But what we saw a few years ago, particularly, during COVID, was that a lot of the traditional accountancies don't have enough context about sole traders to actually understand how to manage them from a tax and accounting perspective, because it's not their bread and butter. Whereas because we specialize and we say, well, we're not doing companies, we're not doing trusts or partnerships, we're going to be experts in sole trader, and we do that across tens of thousands of customers across a bunch of industries. We have that deep level of industry knowledge for 6, 7, 8 years that, again, you can't learn that overnight. You can't copy that overnight, because you need to know the players, you need to know the cycles of those industries to be able to actually work within them, rather than come sort of blaring in and go, hey, well, we've got exactly the same product as them, barring we're going to charge a little bit less and be a bit more slapdash with our calculations. It's just not going to work.
Yeah, and it's crazy how much specific knowledge you can build up over something that, say, just sole traders might not seem like a great opportunity, because there's all these other types of businesses that an accountant could serve. But in fact, there's so many sole traders across New Zealand, then Australia, then the UK, the opportunity is actually almost endless. And with that advent of sole traders, I'm not privy to any of the sort of stats, but I know that there was a lot of talk about the rise of the gig economy over the coming sort of 10 years, which started probably 5 years ago. How do you think that gig economy sort of forecast has played out, and how has it played into Hnry's hands as well?
I think, well, the first thing to note is that I think there's always a lot of misunderstanding about the gig economy and what it is. And, for a lot of people, it seems like this idea of the gig economy has suddenly emerged in the last few years with mostly around, rideshare platforms and various other things. But fundamentally, the gig economy has been around for decades. The whole naming of it as in gigs. This is people who, on a Friday night would go down and in their band would play gigs and they would earn a little bit of money on the side. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding that people assume that the gig economy is all about making full-time income, when the gig economy section of the sole trader small business market is all about, it's fundamentally set up to supplement income. It's not a full-time source of income. And I think that's where some of the misunderstanding comes, because people just assume, oh, well, if I'm a gig worker, which we would classify as being, you're a rideshare driver, or you have surplus capacity of something that you're selling on a short-term basis, there's no ability for you to earn a full-time income off that. If you look at sort of people who are these kind of interesting services that crop up in the US, where you've got a car that you don't use, that you rent to someone for a couple of days, you're never really going to sustain a full-time income off that, because the prices aren't there and the demand's not there. And so what we see is, the gig economy is all about supplementing income and having a portfolio of income streams that you work across. So you might be a courier driver for your main source of income, but at the same time, you might be charging electric scooters, because you have capacity in a van at the end of the day that is now empty, that you fill with the electric scooters. You take them home, you then charge them, you then bring them back and deploy them around the city before you pick up your parcels in the morning. That's the kind of ethos of the gig economy, is using additional capacity you've got of something in order to generate some income. And so what we see is that it's very rare to find someone whose only income is gig work. Usually they have a salaried job and they earn a bit on the side. We see a lot of real estate agents that do rideshare driving in between viewings. So yeah, there's absolutely been a rise of the gig economy. But I think sort of broader than that, what we've seen is the lowering of barriers to entry into self-employment, some of which we can attribute to services like Hnry. And we've seen a lot more people start to think about how they could earn income from different means. That doesn't mean that they're all going to go to the gig economy. It might be that they start to think about, if they're a full-time salaried graphic designer, how do they start doing some freelance work on the side and earning some income from different sources? And so there's this idea of the gig economy, which is sort of one subset of self-employment. And then there's this much wider sort of progression, which is a number of people taking control of how and from whom they earn income. And that in a lot of cases, people are turning to some form of self-employed income for their for their earnings. And it's interesting to see that what we're seeing is, people working remotely for managing server farms for organizations in the United States, or people doing sort of contract customer support in the sort of, daytime New Zealand time that might be nighttime in a different country. That's not gig work. That's just contracting, freelancing. It's self-employment. Whereas that gig work is very much the sort of subset of the sort of self-employed community that earns some of their income from a sort of a gig platform or some form of sort of micro income.
Wow, what a detailed breakdown. You obviously know your stuff.
Well, this is what you say. You're doing this for 8 years. You actually fully understand the landscape and how it operates. And for us, that's the big benefit we provide to our customers, is that we actually know this stuff. We're not just out there kind of going, yeah, it's easy, it's just tax rates. It's actually what we do as an organization is fundamentally so much more than just calculating and paying people's tax. It's actually being the country's largest advocate and the largest sort of font of knowledge for self-employment.
Yeah, no, I can see how much information you've sort of gathered and the clear understanding you have of the industry and all of its intricacies as well. So far, we've sort of learned just now there's a lot of people gravitating towards self-employment in some vein, and then also that you're the biggest accounting provider in New Zealand. Did you say Australia as well? Excuse me.
I think we're the fastest growing in Australia. There's but it's it will be a while, but we will absolutely get to largest accountancy in Australia as well over the next little while.
Love that. So the largest accounting provider in New Zealand, soon to be largest provider of accounting services in Australia as well. What do you, for your customer, who do you see as your actual biggest competitor? Because they must be on some of them on pen and paper, to some extent you were Others will be using, an accountant themselves. Who is your biggest competitor these days?
It's interesting because we talk about, when you look at just pure accounting software, we always say, well, accounting software is like an apple and we're a fruit salad. We incorporate some parts of what that accounting software does, but we also do a lot more on top of that. And when we look at kind of competitors, yes, we are, because we're processing payments, there are a bunch of payment providers or even banks that would like some of this business. Traditional accountancies look at us and say, well, Hnry's a competitor for traditional accounting, and then we get accounting software providers that do the same. But the biggest competitor, just to kind of answer your question in a different way, is actually just it's individual inertia. It's the fact that as sole traders, a lot of people are stuck in a way of doing things that they can't get out of. They have a traditional accounting relationship where they're effectively forced to purchase accounting software that is too complex for their needs, that they pay a large amount of money for but don't get value for money from, and then they have to spend their own time maintaining it. They are reconciling transactions, they are having to go and categorize. They're in the same situation that Claire and I were back in the day, where you effectively pay a traditional accountant $2,000 a year for them to print off your accounting software for you and hand it back to you and say, is this everything? Is this all correct? And you sign it and say, yep. And then they go and, pop it through to the government, which means that as an individual, you're stuck in this never-ending loop of admin, and having to think about admin, having to kind of perform activity, working in your business, not on your business. And we can show people the better way. And we can say, hey, Hnry is a service that brings together all of your payments and we do everything for you. And then it's all of your accounting and we do everything for you. And it's right-sized software that is pay as you go. So you only pay when you need it. And people will say, yeah, but all of my stuff is over there, and it becomes too hard pile for people because they go, well, yeah, I don't like the accounting software because it's expensive and they jack up the prices twice a year. I don't really like the accountant because I'm never sure that he understands my industry because he's very generic and spends more of his time doing companies and trusts and partnerships, and I don't like the bank because they charge me fees on everything and I have to plug in third-party services to be able to take online payments. But that's the hurdle you've got to get over, is the fact that people have already got a setup. They've already got something they're using, and you can show them something as we do with Hnry, and say, hey, this is going to save you like $1,000 and 200 hours a year. And people will still go, yeah, but I can't be bothered, And I think our competitor is just people's own sort of enthusiasm for making change. And I look at it and go, look, we are very aware of the fact that tax and accounting is not sexy. This is not a sexy business. People are not, whilst we love our customers and they love the value they get from the service, we've got this in the UK at the moment. I keep saying to our team, we need to get rid of our wait list because no one wants to go on the wait list for an accountant. Like it's a thing that people are not going to get. You're not in line for concert tickets. You're getting an accounting service. So let's be realistic. So I do think that there's a certain amount of it where in order to compete, you've got to be so compelling. It's not just, hey, this is new and shiny, but you've really got to deliver that compelling value prop, which is back to that differentiation we were talking about earlier. That's actually, we're competing on so many fronts with so many different people that, it's not about going and try and win people over, by saying, hey, we're better than your existing accountant. It's by going, actually, this is a brand new kind of way of doing things, and it's fundamentally going to supercharge your business. It's going to actually make your business go faster. It's going to make you more money. It's going to save you money at the same time. And sometimes people need to hear from other people about how good that is. You talk about our referral rate is 30, 40% of everyone who signs up to Hnry first heard about it from friends and family. That's the kicker there. Is like, if you hear it from someone else, it's much better than hearing it from us.
Yeah, exactly. And that referral rate is definitely crazy for Hnry anecdotally. Like I've come across multiple cleaners using Hnry, lawn mowers, like gardeners, people using Hnry. And I asked them, how did you even come across Hnry? And it's always like, someone else told me to use it because that's what they do and they do this job as well. So it's crazy how much, getting started with a software like Hnry can really benefit you, as opposed to even having to go through all of the difficulty of using an accountant and not wanting to change, and it all feels too hard. And it's kind of the thing you no one sets out to run their own business so that they can file their tax returns, right? And so it's often something that you'd prefer not to think about. With that in mind, before starting Atlas, I also was a contractor. Obviously, would have to file my own tax returns as well. I used an accountant for a little bit, and I felt like there is a bit of a learning curve there, just in terms of even like payment dates and things like that. Like, hold on, why is it that I have to pay, provisional tax now, or why is the regularity of my GST payments changed, or whatever it may be. I know that Hnry sort of takes a lot of that thinking off your plate, but what do you also do to just help to educate your audience around upskilling and understanding what goes on and into their tax returns as well?
A lot of that is about just being transparent with the information. So I found when I had an accountant that that learning curve almost, I felt sometimes I was often being like patronized by my accountant because I didn't know the difference between a kind of provisional tax and a terminal tax payment, or, and having to ask questions kind of felt like I was back in school, and I was too dumb to work out what was going on, and everyone else was smarter than me. And so a lot of what we do is translate for our customers. And so our customer support team, so we have, we're not faceless SaaS software. We have real humans that support our customers that you can come and ask them questions. And a lot of what they're trained to do is actually to help translate those concepts and to be cognizant of the fact that actually sole traders and small business owners don't know about tax. They actually don't want to know about tax, but what they need is enough context and enough information to know what their responsibilities are. Because at the end of the day, it's still a sole trader's responsibility, which is, you worry about these services where people are just, abdicating responsibilities to AI. At the end of the day, if IRD come and want to audit you, or the ATO come and want to look through your receipts, it's up to you to provide that information. It's not on your accountant. It's not on your software. And so if you're there and you go, oh, well, I just chucked everything into this program that was doing AI and they said I could do all of this stuff, it's on you. Like, you can't hide behind someone else's software. So a lot of what our customer support staff do is make sure our customers know what they can and can't claim, make sure they're aware of their responsibilities. And sometimes that means, translating those hard concepts. And sometimes it's just about being transparent about what's going on, because no one likes to hand over their finances to like an invisible box that you can never get anywhere near. And so ironically it's about being transparent to the customers and making sure they understand what's going on, not just assuming that no one wants to know anything about it and they'll just, oh, that's fine, just pay in here, don't ask any questions, something will come out the other end.
Yeah, it's really powerful, I think, putting that information back in people's hands, and also just even engaging with Hnry from a support component. Your accountant typically doesn't have like a support chat feature you can talk to at any moment and find out what you need, right? So even that's a massive value add and like educational opportunity if people want it to be as well. Moving on to growth in operations, before I hit the record button, you'd mentioned you're sort of at 140, 150 staff. So that's, first of all, congratulations, in 8 years. That's absolutely phenomenal. With that being said, like, what is, a couple of the more difficult operational challenges that you've faced as, say, you've expanded into Australia and have like 2 geographies and now 3 over in the UK as well?
I think the biggest thing for us, and we had this when we started out in Australia, is less so operationally our ways of working, which quite comfortably scale, and we iterate our ways of working and our ways of delivering, and always have done, to kind of right size with where we're at staff wise. Some of the hardest stuff is actually just changing habits of the kind of people's thought processes. So, when we went to Australia, because you start small and you build things up over time, and all of your engineering resources in New Zealand, you need all of your engineers to think about Australia. Even though they've spent a couple of years only thinking about New Zealand, everything they do from that point on, they need to think about, hey, how does Australia do this? And how do we make sure that we consider where this impacts Australia? And then again, now we're in the UK. Obviously, Australia is great because, they call it GST and they've got dollar signs. So you're kind of cool. That's a bit of a saving there. But you look at the UK and you go, now we're at the stage with, 100 odd people, and you're having to say to the engineers, you can't keep referring to it as GST anymore behind the scenes or internally. You have to call it sales tax, because there's GST in Australia and New Zealand, and there's VAT in the UK. So you get this interesting thing where actually you need people to change their mindset and get out of that behavior of going, everything's Australia or everything's New Zealand, and suddenly going, okay, how does this thing scale? How does it go global? What is the way we're going to structure this? because it's not stopping, it's not slowing down. We've got an amazing growth rate in our primary markets, and it's, we have to start thinking, okay, well, if the UK becomes our next primary market and we have additional ones coming online after that, operationally, we have to constantly be thinking about where else we can be providing extensibility and scalability. So that's been a really interesting challenge to almost hit the reset button from the staff's perspective every time we go into a new country and we go, okay, now you're in a new country, you can't just prioritize just the things for New Zealand, or you can't just assume or even use words like IRD all of the time, because you're feeding that narrative that it's only a New Zealand environment you need to think about. And it's constantly reinforcing to people that, hey, it's 3 countries now. What are the ways that we're going to work to make sure we don't forget New Zealand and we prioritize what is our current largest market, but also that we don't miss out on the opportunity of doing things that will benefit the other markets as well.
Yeah, it's crazy how your thinking needs to change and adapt so much as you continue to grow your business and add in different geographies, and then also somehow get your team to think differently as well, right? Like, it's hard to move a whole group of people to sort of shift ideas or learn something or learn a new habit, even if it's as simple as calling it, sales tax versus GST. As far as your growth goes, how do you go about selecting new markets? Obviously, New Zealand was the start, then Australia, then the UK. I'm not sure if you're going public with what you might have in mind next, but what's led you to sort of make those decisions as well?
We've actually run a very structured process. So for my sins, many years ago, I was a management consultant, and we've got got a strategy team internally, and a couple of them used to be management consultants. And so we're very good at building models and scorecards and doing analysis to work out where the logical next places are. And so, we look at a bunch of lenses like digital literacy, proportion of self-employed population, current pain points and challenges, legislative environment, banking environment, and weigh all of those up to say, well, actually, where is going to be the most, the most valuable place for us to go next? Not necessarily the easiest or the simplest, the smallest, but actually which one is going to be the best return on investment. And there's obviously a much longer list of places that we could go beyond the 3 that we're in at the moment. And I'm not going to get too far into that bit, but it's a very logical and methodical process to do this that has very much emerged from the early days of kind of, I wonder if this would work in Australia, to now actually going, what we have is something that's scalable, that actually, as we expand and we keep the flywheel moving, we are able to expand beyond the jurisdictions we're in and then deliver value back into each of those. So it's very much that idea that, whilst we're building something for the UK, for instance, we'll backfill that into Australia and New Zealand at the same time to make sure everyone gets the uplift and everyone gets the benefit. So as we strike into new features and new things that are required, as much as possible, we're like, hey, let's make sure everyone gets the benefit of this. So it's not one of those things where a new market means you deprioritize an old market. It actually means a new market brings new features, new things that will help with the maturity of previous markets.
Yeah, wow, I love that. So rather than just like a pure software sort of economy of scale of you can expand your available audience and then grow your customers with little sort of change to the core product, is actually like an economy of scale growing out of expanding into a new market, and that, resulting in a bunch of new different features and value adds for clients right across all geographies. That's awesome. Talking a little bit about your founder experience and leadership just before, or as we sort of finish up, you've talked about being an independent contractor and a management consultant as well. Kind of a direct question, but did you see yourself as an entrepreneur, or is this something that you just became an entrepreneur? Like, what's your sort of experience been in that? Did you always think you'd start your own company, or is this something you sort of look back and be like, wow, I can't believe I sort of ended up here, even though it's super well deserved, obviously, and a ton of hard work?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a big fan of the word entrepreneur because it kind of conjures up images of, this kind of serial entrepreneur that has, whether it's multiple exits or whether it's like multiple business ideas and constantly trying new things. I think there's probably, did I think that there would be an opportunity for me to have a company? Probably not. I think, I've always been someone, and Claire's been very much the same, that we've always been about solving problems and taking a sort of common sense approach to solving problems. And, we sort of I don't think either of us were sort of sitting there going, hey, let's go and create this global service that helps people with their tax. I think it was very much a sort of gradual evolution over time that got us to this place. I mean, I think in my younger years, I think, well, again, both Claire and I have been, working from an early age, and we've always been people that have been incredibly driven. And, for both of us, we're sort of school was not necessarily our strong point. We came out with a lot of really good skills out of that. But actually in our working life, we've always been really, really driven at sort of solving problems and making things simpler. And this was just, sort of, as I say, a natural evolution of that. So I think, someone said to me the other day, they're like, oh, fast forward however many years, would you start something else? Like, would you finish with Hnry and start something else? And not to mention, I would be absolutely exhausted. But I don't know. I think this was an amazing thing that grew organically out of solving a problem that we had. And, never say never, but I don't see myself as an entrepreneur or a serial entrepreneur. And I know Claire feels exactly the same way. It's not how we define ourselves. It's very much, even from that leadership perspective, I don't think we define ourselves as being leaders. It's very much like, actually, we just happen to be the people that started this. And we see ourselves as kind of setting a vision and helping people succeed themselves along the way. But, I don't think we would class ourselves as leaders or entrepreneurs because, I just don't think we're there yet. I think there's always more. We're not the finished product, I think, is the best way to think about it.
Yeah, wow. That's a really sort of profound sort of insight into some of how you've approached business as well. I think from the outset, definitely people would call you an entrepreneur and a leader. And I totally understand where you're coming from in terms of that perspective as well. And essentially, you're still just that same person trying to solve that initial problem that you had, but just at a much greater scale. Despite, how you define it, there's no doubt you show a lot of leadership within the business as well. What has been sort of one of the biggest leadership lessons that you've learned over the past 8 years, whether good or bad?
Well, there's a really interesting thing that, I do, I suppose, enjoy, or rather, I get a lot of enjoyment out of kind of passing on my passion and excitement. So me personally, I like, and you've noticed by the way that I talk, I'm very passionate about solving this problem, very passionate about helping customers. And one of the things for our team is about instilling that passion and showing that vision and taking people along that journey. I think one of the things that I don't think I ever really considered is, when we were 10 people in a room back, 7, 8 years ago, you could, because you were living and breathing it and you were in the trenches with everyone else, you could give a rousing, 10-minute monologue on a Monday morning, telling everyone this is the vision and this is where we're going and why. And that enthusiasm would last like, I don't know, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, because people would still be fresh in their minds that was why we were doing this. This is where we were headed. Whereas suddenly you fast forward and we're sort of 140, 150 staff. Because you don't have that relationship with people, I can stand at an all hands and I can give the same 10-minute monologue about where we're headed and where we're going. And sometimes you feel the enthusiasm maybe will only last for a week because so much other stuff goes on that people forget. And so suddenly the frequency and regularity with which you have to reinforce that vision and you have to keep people focused on this is the why, this is where we're going, and this is what it means for our customers. I'd never expected to be in a situation where, my role becomes more about trying to drive that part forward rather than kind of being an individual contributor and being in the business. And, having just come back from spending time in the UK with our team there, I had this really weird experience where, because I had no meetings, I was just spending time with the team, I suddenly became an individual contributor again. And I felt very useful because I sat and I helped build reports and dashboards for Manasseh, who's our head of UK. And I sat down with him and I went through a whole bunch of processes. And it was this amazing feeling of like, I think I actually achieved something today. I added some value. Whereas I think a lot of the time, my role has shifted so much to actually, being less in the trenches and more trying to provide that high level vision and steer on such a regular basis that it keeps people aligned. Because it's very much more about empowering other people now than being the person who like sets up the laptops or runs the marketing campaigns or whatever. So it's very much a mindset shift for me and for Claire to go from doing the doing to actually going, how do we empower and excite other people to go and do this on a regular basis?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I can imagine your role just changes so much and in ways that you didn't envision or necessarily even like that you, it'd be wrong to say like that you want to do, but just in a way that you thought like, oh, I actually have these skills and I guess these are the things I'll end up contributing, but actually it's the passion, the energy, the vision, and all these other things that are maybe a little bit more intangible as well that actually create the biggest outcomes and outputs for Hnry, like downstream across the business as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's the exciting thing, right? Is actually, it is, after 8 years, it's the evolution. It's the fact that, Claire and I aren't doing all of that stuff. And actually, we're passing that on to other people and passing on, hey, this is the risk appetite we want you to take. And this is the approach. And, it's exciting for us to have constantly evolved our role. And prior to Hnry, I think the longest I'd stayed in a job was maybe 2.5 years. And that was because, I would get tired, move on, looking for different things. But here the role has evolved so much that actually you can not only look back and say, wow, I'm doing a very different job now than I was doing 8 years ago, but also you can look forward to and go, in 6 months, in 9 months, in 2 weeks, my role is going to evolve again and the things that I do will change. And that's super exciting because it kind of keeps things interesting and it keeps things fresh. And actually the thing that suddenly excites you now is different than it was then. I mean, back 8 years ago, the exciting thing was, can we get one customer today? And can we get, 1 5-star Google review? We're at the other end of that now. We have like 1,000 Google reviews and, we get so many hundreds of customers every day. It's amazing. But suddenly you're going, okay, how do we now do right by all of those customers? And how do we protect them and make sure that they're all going to be successful themselves? And so it's a very different motivation now than it was then. And that's kind of what keeps it exciting and interesting.
Yeah, that's amazing. Even I feel motivated. I don't even work at Hnry. We're passionate. I love it. Just coming up to time now, we've covered so many interesting topics. You're, really charismatic speaker and clearly know your business super well. Just to finish off, like, what are you most excited about in the next 6 months at Hnry?
I think one of the things I'm most excited about is actually is the opportunity that everyone in the team has. I think we've built such a strong foundation, and Claire leads the sort of the people and culture part of the business. But we've always set out to design a workplace that people wanted to be a part of. We've all, over our careers, we've worked places that we loved, we've worked places that we didn't like, and Claire and I have always taken the constituent parts of places that we love to work and said, let's put those together into somewhere that people are excited to come in every day and they're excited to work with each other. And at that point now, we're actually, with 140, 150 staff, and we do have people who are excited to come in. What gets me excited is actually how do we empower those people to really achieve? And, I can't take any credit for it, but Claire's done a fantastic job of putting in place performance frameworks so that every single member of staff has the clarity and opportunity to succeed and to get additionally remunerated and to learn and to grow. And suddenly your excitement comes from growing that next generation of people who are going to come through and instilling them with the same ethos that you have, rather than constantly trying to jump in and do everything yourself. And granted, I like people who work for Hnry listening to this will know that once in a while I will jump in and get into the detail of stuff. But what excites me is actually the frequency with which I have to do that has significantly reduced because of the fact that the team is so awesome. I don't need to jump into everything and be on the forefront of everything anymore. And actually what's exciting is actually seeing people come to me with the same level of enthusiasm that I have and seeing them make the same kind of decisions that I would have taken. And that's the real payoff, is not feeling like you're a bottleneck or a dependency.
Awesome, James. Hey, it's been so great to chat to you, learn more about Hnry. I love what you're doing. Looking forward to hearing about what's next. And thanks for your time.
Pleasure.